Hi, Laura.
Hey, Katie.
So I am, just so grateful, Laura, for your presence with us in Emerging Proud for this kind of relaunch. We were just chatting, saying we feel like, we've been allies for so many years, and yet we haven't actually had this live interview before. So I so appreciate you being here with us to share your story and your incredible journey. It's
Well, it's
yeah.
an honor. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, it's just beautiful to connect with you. And I know that we just share, so much kind of passion and desire to do this work. So I was just watching a presentation that you gave, and something really landed with me. You said we make art out of our suffering. And I was just like, oh my God, that speaks so profoundly to the Emerging Proud message. So yeah, and I know you are here doing so much incredible, projects and birthing things in the world and new things. And you've been doing this work for a very long time, but you have a really profound story, which I don't know. I think most people in the Emerging Proud community will know you, Laura, and know your story. So you are the founder of the Inner Compass Initiative. Um, but for those who maybe don't know your story, I just wonder if we might start with just rewinding to where it all began for you, if that feels okay.
Yeah, sure. So I met the mental health system when I was a kid. I was 13. I'm 41 now, and I basically was a very sensitive, intense, um, pretty self-determined girl who, I grew up in a wealthy town, went to an all-girls private school. It's kind of in this environment that was that deeply valued performance and so much of who I was as a kid was tied into my schoolwork and sports and all of that. And so by the time I was 13, I had it all together, quote unquote. I was doing life well, quote unquote, according to the standards of kind of the world I grew up in. But I had this really profound crisis one night by myself where I was looking in the mirror and I basically had this out of body experience in which I realized, like, I don't have who am I? I don't have a real self. I'm just performing life. And what do I really care about? What do I really value? And in retrospect, I think it was a profoundly, like, there was so much possibility in that experience to have been something that could have um, changed me for the better. But because I was so young and I didn't have any framework to turn to make sense of what had happened to me, and I wasn't in an environment that in which people talked freely about their emotions and inner experiences, I just suppressed it and tried to pretend it hadn't happened. And so I ended up not long after really falling apart. I just couldn't hold it all inside, going to school every day, going to the squash courts every day, playing this game, performing, knowing that I was a robot, basically. So I started acting out at home and cutting myself and really terrifying my parents, who did the best they could and with their fear and overwhelm, and ended up sending me to a therapist eventually. And this was a long time ago in the mid 1990s. So it wasn't very common at that time for kids to be sent to mental health professionals. And and so I eventually ended up in front of a psychiatrist who very quickly told me that my anger and irritability and my outbursts at home were symptoms of mania, and that my, self-injury and despair and, kind of like, what's the purpose of life? It's all meaningless. Those were symptoms of depression. So in the span of 50 minutes, I got a bipolar diagnosis at age 14 by then. And I was put on a couple meds, and that began what ended up being a nearly decade and a half journey, kind of ever deeper into basically what I like to say, like, a psychiatrized existence. And so I spent my teens and 20s increasingly buying into this idea that my mental and emotional pain and this profound sense of loneliness and isolation, just like not feeling like I fit into the world, that all of that was a sign that something was wrong with me, and that I, had this sick brain, and that I needed these medications to treat it. And that, and as I got older and older, I just kind of increasingly came to believe that all of these experts that I was seeing, all these mental health professionals and doctors and fancy clinics and facilities, that they had my answers, and that eventually one day the right meds would kick in and I'd find the right doctor and I'd one day be happy. And so I just had this faith year after year after year that eventually this is all going to work. All these nice people who are trying to help me are going to figure it out. And that dream just never came to pass. And I just kept getting more and more lost, more and more despairing, more and more hopeless, more and more disconnected. Like really, that was what at the heart of it was happening for me. The more psychiatrized I became, the more disconnected
Yeah.
I grew from my own body, from my sense of self, from other human beings, from nature, from purpose and creativity. And all along I was thinking that was me, like my sick brain getting worse and worse. And so that was my life basically through my 20s, was just going to treatment, being a patient, tracking my symptoms, managing my illnesses, all of this bunny-eared. It was my purpose. It was my calling. And, that me in girlhood who'd been so focused on performance, I just kind of switched that impulse into performing, being a good patient. And that just eventually brought me to a point of basically recognizing like this life of just endless treatment, never being able to function, never being able to take care of myself, never being able to work, being reliant on my family, just being totally dysfunctional, basically, that like this isn't a life worth living. I'm just so sick. None of this treatment's working. Like, what's the point in going on anymore? So I tried to kill myself. I was 25. And to this day, I always say I have this deep respect for that decision that I made, because given the story that I was believing about myself and what my future held for me, which was just like hospitals and pills and therapy and not being able to participate in the world, that was a logical decision to make. And I just didn't realize at the time it was a false story. And so fast forward to 2010, which was really when my, you could say I kind of like woke up from the spell of being a psychiatric patient. I'd had a few encounters with an aspect of the mental health system that I had never encountered before, which is its kind of roots in power, in its ability to force and coerce human beings into doing things on the premise that they're crazy. And so I'd been made to go into the hospital when I didn't want to go in. I was made to take a drug I didn't want to take. I had a therapist call the police on me when I slept through an appointment. I had these experiences that like forced me to just kind of like step back for a minute and be like, whoa, what is this? What is this here? I thought the system was trying to help me and take care of me and one day maybe bring me to a place of happiness. And like, why are my rights being taken from me here? And so that got me thinking about my relationship to the system. And then I ended up not long after coming across a book that we all know and love, Robert Whitaker's Anatomy of an Epidemic, which basically got me questioning all of these medications that I had spent half of my life taking. His thesis that long-term use of these drugs is actually on the whole disabling us, not helping us. It really clicked for me because I was on 5 meds at the time, and as I'm reading this book and looking at the research he shared and hearing the stories or reading the stories of the people he wrote about, I saw myself so clearly in what he was saying. And when I looked back and I saw like, okay, basically the moment I bought into this idea that I was sick and needed pills for the rest of my life, like that was the moment that my life really started to fall apart.
Mm.
And like, what if it wasn't me and my illness all along? Like, what if it was the treatment? So that began this, you know, beautiful and painful new chapter of my life in which this was back in 2010. I decided to come off all these meds, which was the hardest thing I ever did. And I found the determination to basically learn how to be with myself, be with my mind, be with my emotions, all of these facets of me that I had for so long been afraid of because I saw them as pathology.
Mhm.
And yeah, that was 14 years ago, and I've been on that journey ever since.
And what an incredible journey it's been. Oh, wow. Wow. I mean, it's so interesting, Laura, because you just put that in such a like concise synopsis. And I know it's been incredibly painful and 10 years of hell that you went through there. But you know, so much of what you said it comes out in patterns of what people say when they tell their stories for emerging proud. You know, it started with an existential crisis. I was like, who am I? You know, what, hang on, there's more to life than this. You know, it's like waking up to the capitalist system of I don't want to be a robot. I'm here to do something more. And like, what is that? It's like you had this burning knowing inside you at 13 years old. I can really relate to that actually, having those kind of existential questions in teenage years. And it's like that gets all suppressed because we're told, no, you shouldn't be emotional. You know, you've got to achieve and follow the crowd and do the right thing. And it's like you had this knowing. How do you feel now in terms of a lot of people say when they come through emerging proud, it's like I knew that I was here to do something and I was desperately trying to find what that was. And actually, having been through whatever crisis they've been through, it's like maybe and you know, this is a difficult narrative and it might not be right for everyone, but some people say they felt like they went through what they went through because that was what they were here to do, here to change. Does that resonate with you now?
It does, and I agree that that doesn't always sit right with everyone to be able to look back and say, you know,
Yeah.
it all happened for a reason, all that degradation and dehumanization. But I do think for me, um, I think being brought to such depths of meaninglessness and like just cold, stark, sterile, clinical, reductionist, um, like that realm of self-understanding. I think had I not had I not gone there, I don't know if I would have connected with just the deep appreciation I have for life, for other human beings, for you know, having a sense of having a calling, a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, certainly it's not to say like, you know,
Sure.
being degraded is great, everyone. Like it's what you need. But I do think for me, I wouldn't change a minute of it. I really wouldn't. Um, it I'm so grateful for everything that's come into my life as the direct result of being psychiatrized.
Yeah.
And yeah, I really wouldn't change a minute of it.
And that is the thing that is so profound to me. It's like people have been literally to the edge of hell in how they've been disempowered and treated, or even in the experiences, you know, and not feeling heard. But everybody has said, I wouldn't change it now because that's kind of what I'm here to do. And that just makes me feel so emotional. We were talking before about how if you haven't been like to really dark places, you don't appreciate the whole rainbow range of emotions in life. Like life is complex. We're not supposed to be happy all the time, right? And it's like that's just so not being human. And that's kind of what I love about your talks is you really get emotive and you get in the emotion of it all. And maybe we can sort of, yeah, touch a little bit about how you were impacted by the drugs, because I know that's kind of what you've come to do and support people with as your incredible niche. So yeah, maybe if we look a bit at kind of what you offer now and then work back to what helped you get from where you were to what you're doing now.
Sure. So, yeah, much of what I do today is what I would call the arena of informed choice, like helping people get what they need to make true, meaningful choices about taking psychiatric drugs, about the diagnoses themselves and the whole diagnostic paradigm, um, even about what help means. I think the theme of my experience and the experience of my parents, and honestly, I think of the vast majority, if not all people who engage with the mental health industry today, is that we aren't making truly informed choices about any of it.
Yeah.
And what it means to be fully informed, like I don't even know, because I'm still far away from even having all the information, because there are just so many layers of the onion from the drugs themselves, what we actually know about what they are and what they're not and how they affect the body. And it's we really barely even know anything about that. And but the little that we do know is certainly not what most of us are being told when we sit in front of a prescriber and are put on these drugs for the first time. So from that to the DSM and the history of the diagnostic paradigm and the chemical imbalance theory and all of that, we aren't being told the whole story. And the whole story itself is so much bigger than any of us could even fathom, because it's this idea that we can truly know our true nature through science, I think, is like, that in itself is a topic worth diving into. But so yeah, so much of what I do is about helping people get solid information, and more than anything, help people learn how to educate themselves. So it's not me just saying this is what you should believe. It's more, this is the information that is freely available to you to dive into and like sort through yourself, and so that you can make a decision that's right for you, which often is coming off meds, but not always. And it isn't the right decision for everyone, given the uniqueness of each person, the circumstances that they're in, the resources they have at their disposal, the supports that they have or they don't have. So, I a lot of it ends up coming down to tapering and helping people who have decided for themselves, I do want to come off of these drugs, to then teach themselves how to do that in the safest way possible. And that passion, I feel, comes largely from me having not had that information myself and having a brutal experience coming off of 5 drugs way too fast, and realizing that, really honestly, I don't know if I would have made it through if I hadn't been born into socioeconomic circumstances that afforded me so much support and so many resources. Because I realize, so many people are not in that kind of situation. And if coming off of these drugs was the hardest thing I ever did, and I had access to, a safe home and
Yeah.
nutritious food and space and time to rest and all these things that so many people don't. And if it was the hardest thing for me, then how on earth, I need to help other people who don't have what I had. And so I started a nonprofit, as you said, called Inner Compass Initiative, and we help people learn about the drugs and the diagnoses. And then we have a massive basically library of resources on safer tapering. So we have a manual, step-by-step manual that people can work through, teach themselves about how to come off of these drugs as safely as possible, and how to cope with any symptoms that they're struggling with and withdrawal. And then we also have different connecting resources so that people can find one another on this journey and support one another, and in a truly grassroots, like mutual aid way, not in the paid professional way. Because I do think that's an area where, like, to me, the biggest threat to the mental health industry is enough of us realizing we
Yeah.
don't need to turn to it for help because we have each other.
Yeah, I
So
know. You know, Laura, this is what I love. You know, you've said so much there, but what I love about your work and your talks and listening to you and the wisdom is, it's like this is you hold space for that, like you talk about the person to find their own inner wisdom, right? The inner compass and what they need for themselves. But it is like it's this movement of people who have worked this out for themselves, who are now freely giving support, peer support to each other because they're not getting the right information from the services. Because, and to be fair to people working in the system, it's because they've not been given the right information in the training either. This isn't about a blame game. It's like everybody's swimming in this confused fog of like, why are people not getting better? Why are things getting worse? And it is the survivors, it's the survivor movement who are leading the way to the new paradigm. Like you say, it's the biggest threat because, you know, we are an army of sea change, and it's, yeah, finding each other. And I know in a Compass you provide community, like an online community, and you've got a new course, right?
yeah, so within the nonprofit, we have Inner Compass Exchange, which is an online community that now has some community-led calls, like online Zoom calls, and just like a forum where people are sharing their experiences with one another. And then separate from the nonprofit, because for a while now I've been working one-on-one with people who are coming off meds and just wanting more intensive personal support, which, is not within the mandate of the nonprofit. Then they're separate things, but some of my fellow former patients and I have started we're calling it Fortify and Focus. And so it's a group support program. So it's not explicit, it's not mutual aid in the sense that we're in more of a coaching role, kind of like a mentoring role, you could say, because people often, for some people, mutual aid is enough. It's all they want and all they need to just like forge friendships that are, organic, and meeting up at the coffee shop or hopping on a phone call to catch up, and that's all they need. Sometimes people want, especially if, and I relate to this, you get so trained not just by being a psychiatric patient, but just really by participating more broadly in like kind of consumerist,
Yeah.
like professionalized society. You just get trained to outsource expertise, and this wisdom that is in each and every one of us, that always is there. I truly believe that. But sometimes we lose touch with it. And so having someone in your life who is not, in a professional like power differential role, but who's like maybe further along the same path that you're on, and who's able to kind of be by your side to mentor you, but not give you answers, not tell you what to do. That's really at the heart of this separate thing that we've launched, that we just launched in September. And I'm really excited about it, also in part because I think we're building, and when I say we, it's many of us former patients who are building our own kind of like parallel, I don't want to call it a system, but a parallel space in which we're all taking the expertise that we've gained through what we've lived, and creating like a whole new kind of like marketplace of ideas and experiences and skills and offerings. Like layperson expertise to me is the future. Like
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
really excited about it. And yeah,
Yeah.
we're in the beginnings of what I think is going to be a big threat to the industry, you could say.
Couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. I think we're in this collapse of hierarchies and yeah, yeah, people like you who've been there are leading the way and you're creating this beautiful web of, like you say, collaboration and everyone can bring their own wisdom into that pot. And I love how you described it as like, you're just walking alongside someone to hold that space because you've been there. You might be a little bit further along the path, but they've got their wisdom within. Absolutely. That's got to be the way forwards. Yeah. So, and I guess, like some people, yeah, they might be disempowered and want to outsource their, like you say, their wisdom for the time being, but also the impact of the drugs, right, on your cognition, on your ability to think and understand and make sense of information is so impaired. So that's also kind of necessary at the beginning, maybe as well, or when someone's really in that tapering edge, of coming off the drugs. So
Yep,
would
that's a
you
good point.
would you mind just kind of going back because I know you've got a new autobiography coming out as well, which I'm really excited about and would love to talk to you about that. But I wonder whether we might just go back and so I know when, I've watched you talk, you describe yourself as just kind of mute, paranoid, you didn't want to go out, you put on loads of weight, you were just, so disconnected from your body and your all of your functions. So to get from that point to like where you are now, this like mum, you were told that you would never have a life, you would never work, you would, basically you've got nothing to live for. And now I know, you're a mum to a lovely little boy and you're married and you're an exec director, a founder of this incredible movement and people around the world know your story, Laura, it's like so how did you go from there? Like what helped you? Can you were there like particular things along the path that have helped you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, and I'll preface it by saying that every step of the way for me felt like I had no idea where I was going or what I was doing. So it's easy with hindsight to look back and say, oh, this helped me and this helped me. And I can definitely share some of those things. But if to anyone watching this or listening to this who just doesn't see a way forward, who is just completely baffled by how to ever like build a bridge back into your life, that was me every day of every week of every month for quite a long stretch in the beginning. And so yeah, I think what got me so I came off of everything in 2010. As I said, I was on 5 drugs. I had no idea how to taper. So I came off of them in about half a year, which is essentially cold turkey. I was very enmeshed with, the psychiatric hospital that I was spending a lot of time in then. So my days basically looked like me going to day treatment, and that was my structure. Um, and I had no support there from anyone, no moral or emotional support around my decision to come off. Like the vibe was basically, we can't stop you, but you're going to regret this. And like, you'll come basically, you'll come becoming crawling back to us down the line and you'll regret this. Like they didn't say that, but that was the vibe. So what I did have at that time that I think was hugely beneficial to me, though I didn't realize it at the time, was I had quit drinking. And so I was very involved in the 12-step world. So having a space where I could go every day for free, multiple times a day if I needed it, where I could hear and feel and like be with others who had been to the dark depths of the human experience and their on all their different ways, and who many of whom had moved through and had let go of the shame and the isolation and the regret and all the things that I was so mired in when I was in the beginning of coming off these meds. That was huge for me. And it didn't really matter that it wasn't explicitly about withdrawal. The details of it didn't matter. It was just a space where I could be with others who were in what I was in or had been there before. So that was huge. I think internally, what was most important for me especially in the beginning when I was like in the process of coming off and for the first year or two of being off, was I had a very clear sense of my why, like why I was coming off of these drugs, what it was that I was going towards. And for me, it was that I had no idea who I was off meds because I had been on them since I was a kid. And so it was, I think, really a profound sense of curiosity. Like, who, if I'm not this like resistant mentally ill person who has a future of psych wards and pills and suicide, like, who could I become? And I knew I could always kill myself. Like, I had that out, which helped me kind of push through. So having a clear why was big. Um, I think another piece that was really essential too was my journey of kind of like re-embodiment. You know, like you said, for me and for so many of our fellows, like I was just so disconnected from my physicality and all the facets of me that exist in the corporeal form. And you know, I didn't know how to, like, I didn't even know what my body's messages were, let alone how to listen to them. And so again, like I didn't set out to do this. I didn't like consciously realize I need to re-embody. I just, now when I look back, I'm like, okay, a lot of it was about learning how to hear what my body was telling me and then eventually learning how to act accordingly. And so a lot of that ended up being in my relationship to food, basically to what I was putting in my body. And so, you know, I just with time began to pay closer attention to how I felt after I binge ate those like 2 pints of ice cream that I had needed to rely on to get through my night because otherwise I wanted, you know, I didn't know if I could make it through. And I began to say, how do I feel after this?
Right.
And just slowly with time, I'd be like, you know what? I'm gonna make a different choice. And then after I'd make a different choice, I'd be like, wow, I actually feel different. And just in these tiny little baby step ways. Like, and it wasn't about dieting. It was truly about like, how do I feel when I put X, Y, Z in my body? Um, and then I do think the other piece that I would, and there's so many more, but I'll just share the other big one was finding a way to channel all that I was holding inside of me into something constructive, into an offering that I could give the world that helped. Oh gosh, and I feel so emotional talking about it, that helped me feel like I belonged here. And I do think for me it was writing. It was like starting this blog. Well, originally it was called Journeying Back from Self, but then I started my own website and it was called Recovering from Psychiatry. And that was so big because I, for so long, was convinced that I had wasted my life. All of those years of being a psychiatric patient were wasted, lost. I was so behind. I'd never catch up. It was too late for me. Like all those stories
Mhm.
lived in my head. And when I began to write my story and like take my story back from the mental health industry, really, and I began to connect with people who related, who identified with what I was writing, I realized it wasn't all in vain. Like you know, it goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning. Like there was a reason for this. Like
Yeah.
so I think to anyone who's in the thick of it right now, who might be feeling like it's all futile and useless and meaningless, it very much isn't. And it's just about giving yourself the space and time and finding the curiosity and cultivating the courage you need to keep putting yourself into the world every day to the best of your abilities until that starts to click, like what it is you're here for, what it is you can create and give and build out of what you've been through. So I
Beautiful.
think those are the highlights of what really helped me, I would say. And
Mm.
yeah, I mean, there's so many more, but those are the big ones, I would say.
Thank you, Laura. So powerful listening to you. And I think, like, yeah, like you were saying, it's like the power of story as well. And it's like we, if we are brave enough to own our stories, it's like that gives us the why like, and it takes us back to your existential questioning as well. Like, why am I here? Like, actually allowing yourself to be with that question that came up for you as a 13-year-old when you were looking in the mirror. It feels like, yeah, you spent so many years with psychiatry disempowering you, but actually, so many people have that why existential crisis in midlife, or like, have the kids leave home, and then it's like, who am I? So it feels like you had that really young, and it's like your why is like now you're you're doing it, right? And it's the power of story. That's what Emerging Proud is all about, because we know that that's how people connect, that's how people learn from each other. And thank you for saying as well, if you don't need to have this big huge idea about why you're here. And still now, like, I'll lose touch with the trajectory, and I'll not feel great, and I'll have some thoughts, and I'll be like, whoa, okay, I'm just going to watch that. What's that about? Because it's just telling me I'm just not right on the right path. And I don't ignore those feelings anymore, and it's fucking hard. Like, so literally fall to my knees crying sometimes, because it's like, oh, not again. Like, how did I miss that? And it's like, it's okay. It's okay. It's just a nudge. Yeah,
Totally.
thank you. Thank you.
Oh, and I love what you just said, because I think I think sometimes, and I fell into this trap myself early on. Sometimes it feels like, when you realize the diagnoses and drugs aren't serving you, and you decide to leave it behind, and you're on this quest to get off them, it, for me at least, for a while, it still, I still felt sure that the end game was like getting happy, being at peace. Like, yes, I'm not sick. There's nothing wrong with my brain. Um, and the drugs were harming me. So now I need to like get off them so I can feel better and
Mm,
like feel good. And it took me a while to realize, like, actually, the to be psychiatrized, for me at least, went so much deeper than just the diagnoses and the drugs. It really was about learn being taught to be afraid of pain, and to be afraid of the really twisted, wacky, like terrifying places that my mind can very easily run to, and often does run to,
mm,
with that fear of myself. That was the core imprisonment. And so when I started to click with that, um, and I was probably like a few years off the drugs, and so I'd healed a lot, but I was still learning how to be here, and it was a lot, and it was overwhelming, and I felt a lot of pain, and my mind, I was like extremely paranoid, and really had a hard time trusting anything and anyone. And when this started to click with me, I would actually, like, I got really pissed and outraged about how much I'd swallowed this bullshit story of being afraid of oneself. And so, almost from a place of defiance, I would like deliberately sit with my mind,
mm.
and like kind of how you were describing, like you're noticing these really, really wild and like crazy, in the most human sense of the word, crazy
Yeah.
places your mind's taking you right now. And like, when I was a psychiatric patient, I'd be freaking out, like, oh my gosh, my symptoms are,
Yeah. Yeah.
emerging. I need to call my doctor. I need to get in for another therapy session. Maybe I need to up my meds. And I would just sit there and be like, no, I'm gonna fucking feel it. Like, I'm gonna let it like take me over and take me wherever it's gonna take me. And I'm not gonna do anything. I'm just gonna be with it.
Mm,
And when I started, the more I practiced it and practiced it and practiced it, the more I realized, like, I can do this. Like, and I don't need to, and doing is actually being, just being
yeah.
with it, not doing anything. And that I don't have to be afraid of it, no matter how like crazy and dark it is. Like, it's just thought. It's not real. It's not it doesn't have to be my truth. It's just, you
Yeah.
know, my mind. But what's here right now is like this, or feeling myself in my seat, or like feeling the breath in my lungs. Like, that's real, not this. And that was like a huge ignition for me.
Mm.
Um, and the beautiful thing is we all have this in
We
us.
all do it.
Always. Yeah.
No, we all have shadow, and yeah, it's like we don't have to act on it. And I think, thank you so much for saying that, Laura, because, I want to talk really openly about the fact that everyone has murderous impulses. Everyone has this really dark shit going on. And if we don't normalize it, that's why it gets played out in the world. That's why, because people panic when they have this stuff come up. It's like, oh my God, it's me. There's something wrong with me.
Yes.
Like, no, it's part of being human. It's archetypal. We all have it, but we don't have to
Totally.
or act on it. Yeah. Thank you.
Totally. And that's where the storytelling piece is so big because, like you said, when it seems invisible, when you feel like you're the only one because you're not seeing it anywhere, you're not seeing anyone else talk about this, you're not seeing anyone else express this, it is easy to feel like something wrong with you. You're the outsider. And the more that we all in our own ways like put out there our darkness, like nothing, I love nothing more. I often will say this, it really cracks me up. Like I cry all the time. Like I cry
Mhm.
multiple, sometimes like multiple times a day.
Yeah.
And I just I love it when I can feel it emerging in me. I'm like, whew, let's let it out. And there's nothing more that I love now than when I'm like giving a talk to an audience of mental health professionals, like especially psychiatrists. Like a long time ago, I would be embarrassed and ashamed, and I'd like feel the tears, and I'd be like, oh gosh, I have to suppress them. Like I want to look professional. Now I'm like, let's let it out. And I can feel how uncomfortable and how
Yeah.
discombobulated they often are because they're like, I can't compute this. She's presenting, but crying. Is she okay? Like you can almost feel they're like they don't know what to do with it. And
Yeah.
I think it's like a kind of activism for all of us to feel fully in public, visibly with one another, including with mental health professionals, because I have deep compassion for people working in the mental health system because I think 99.9% of them have good hearts. They went into this to help,
Yeah.
and something has happened along the like you can't forcibly drug someone without being
Repressing,
dehumanized yourself. Like
repressing your own feelings, and it's
exactly.
such a inhumane place to be, and so sad, and like,
It's
yeah,
so sad. And
pressing
we have to help them, invite them back into their darkness as
human.
well.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. That's why I'm like, I just express love as well. It's like
Totally.
all like crying, love. It's part of being human. Yeah, yeah, thank you. I love this. It's where we connect. And I know we need to wrap up, but I just really want, yeah, I want you to, so story, the power of story, which leads us to what you're doing now. So you have just published, or
It's
it's
well, it will be out. So it's my first book. It's called Unshrunk: A Story of Psychiatric Treatment Resistance. Yeah, I love the title.
like genius.
Yeah. So I've been at it for 5 years. I mean, really a lot longer, but um, I sold the book 5 years ago. So it's been a long time coming. I'm very ready to be done with it. But it'll be out in March in both in the US and then it's also coming out in the UK and Commonwealth countries. And it's a memoir of basically everything we talked about today. But I also weave in a lot of research into some of the drugs that I was on. I look at the history of psychiatry in the 20th century in the US and actually in the UK a bit too, and kind of trying to trace, you know, how did it go from what it originally was, which was a um, self-described art form. Like if you look at how psychiatrists talked about themselves 100+ years ago, they prided themselves on the art of caring for people. And so how do we kind of go from there? And of course, there were many problems with psychiatry when it thought of itself as an art as well. But so it wasn't all roses or anything. But how did we go from there to this kind of totally medicalized, pharmaceuticalized, reductionist
Yeah.
thing that it is today? So I traced the history of that and because it felt important to me to contextualize my personal story within this broader story that we are all a part of, because I wanted to make very clear, like, I was not an anomaly here. What happened to me was not an unfortunate mistake. Like, it was the system working as it is designed to work. So I'm excited to hopefully start conversations around the book, because um, my story is everyone's work is, I this is a we all have this story, and I think I feel a tipping point coming where our society is like ready for our stories. Just the fact that this big publisher that my book is coming out with is behind this book, I don't hold back. Like, this book is a very strong critique. Um, so I take that as a good indicator that the world is ready for our stories, and they're coming.
World is ready for a new paradigm, absolutely.
Indeed.
Yes, and it is survivors like you who are providing the net, when the people in power who are suppressing their emotions and need to cry and let go are catching, it's like, yeah, I had that vision. My experience is like people in power are gonna fall and need the support of the grassroots movements.
Mm. It's so beautiful. And I love that you talked about love, because I do think it can be easy to polarize oneself in this, and like an us and them, good and bad. We are all in this together. We have all been misled by false stories on both sides of the proverbial locked door. And it will be love that, and compassion and empathy and understanding, that brings us into a new chapter. I truly believe that. And it's so much of what I love about your work and everything that you've built, is that it's built in that heartfelt place, and we all need to be there together to do this work.
Thank you, Laura. What a beautiful place to end on. Yeah,
Thanks so much for having me. It's so good chatting with you, and it's an honor to be here.
thank you so much. So much love to you.
You too.